more and more content available, it's harder to know what's worth watching and what might be a waste of your time. There are many hidden gems out there waiting to be discovered, and we want to help you find them. This is Trailer Rewind, a podcast where we discuss and review recently forgotten or overlooked films that are now available to stream at home. Today is July 27th, 2021, and The Souvenir is available on Amazon Prime, Canopy, and Hoopla.
I feel as though I want to not live my whole life in this very privileged part of the world I come from. I want to be really aware about what's going on around me. Sorry.
We can all be sincere, but what's it all for?
So I'm trying to work out where you two tessellate here. How, what, why, when.
Can you lend me a couple of quid?
Yeah, sure. Not me. Can I borrow some money? Please.
More money?
Yes.
Oh. You're too nice. You need to properly get aggressive.
Don't lie, Anthony.
If you don't want to know,
I do
then
want to
don't
know.
ask. Stop torturing yourself.
I'm not.
Stop inviting me to torture you.
The Souvenir premiered at the Sundance Film Festival on January 27th, 2019. A24 acquired distribution rights in the U.S., and it was released into 4 U.S. theaters on May 17th, 2019. Over the summer of 2019, it expanded its release and grew to 143 theaters 3 weeks later in June, and then dropped off, leaving theaters in mid-July. Over that 9-week theatrical run in the U.S., it made just over $1 million. Shortly thereafter, it was released in the United Kingdom by Curzon Artificial Eye for a run lasting from August 18th to November 2021, where it made an additional $680,000. So this was only released in the US and the UK. That was it.
Yeah.
So very limited.
Yeah, it feels like a
on
small release, definitely, when we're watching it.
It does. And I remember that it got a lot of attention when it was released. Lots of awards consideration, a lot of talk about this film. And that's, one of the reasons why I picked this one. Interestingly enough, the sequel is, if you stick around to the end credits, you see The Souvenir Part 2 coming soon. And
Really?
Writer-director Joanna Hogg had conceived of this as a 2-part story, and the question was whether to shoot them back-to-back simultaneously or to have some time between them. And the second part of this, The Souvenir, premiered at the Cannes Film Festival this past summer. So it will be coming out in theaters later this year. So for those of you that are interested in the sequel to the story of The Souvenir, you'll be able to catch that in theaters this coming fall.
Quick question. World's most unlikely sequel? Does it get that award? I mean, no, yes. And I probably shouldn't say most unlikely, but you would never guess that there would be a sequel to this film. This really feels like a one-shot autobiographical life story, right?
Yes, I think that's the interesting part of, this concept is, I guess this is the first part of the story, and knowing that this is based on, writer-director Joanna Hogg's, her life experiences. So clearly part 1 is an arc or a series of events that are, contained in this part of her life. And part 2 will be the next part of that story. I don't know how connected it will be to that, other than I'm assuming our main character, clearly we've got, family, all of those pieces. But yes, this story seemed to be a contained piece within itself. It is not something that you're aching to find out what happens next for this character. It's not a setup like a cliffhanger of, oh my gosh, what happens next? I can't wait to see. It is truly a standalone movie that I think, works in that. And I guess the best way for me to describe this story is, it is really a sequence of key moments in a relationship between two people, I think, is the best way that I could characterize this, because I really struggled to find something else that this is like. This is not my type of film, so it's not something I thought, oh, it's just like this or that. It's a dramatic story around a relationship with two people. Other than the fact that this is a film student, there was not a lot for me to identify with in terms of the story, the era, It's set in the early 1980s. Sure, I enjoyed some of the music, but I was not, living in England in the early 80s. I was not a film student. I,
Sure.
Couldn't relate to these pieces, although the setting, the politics of, things going on with Ireland, and those are all things I'm aware of. So it wasn't like I was disoriented with this film.
Right.
It was just something that it was challenging for me to connect to, and particularly the fact that there is not a traditional, like, overarching, like, huge, it's not a high concept, big conflict, of like, is she or is she not going to get into film school? Is she or is she not going to? There's none of that. It's really about Julie and Anthony and these moments that they have together.
Yeah, and I guess my point about bringing up the sequel piece is that it feels, it's an art house film. It's really meant to show the versatility of the medium in terms of how you can produce art through film. I mean, it's almost meta to say that when you're talking about a film student being your main character. But at its core, I think, you're asking what kind of film it is. I think it is a very interesting portrait of addiction. And I think that's really key to talk about with it, because it's not explained in the synopses that I've seen. And, I watched it on Amazon Prime, and I used my little Just Watch app to find out where I could find it. And nothing about it leads you to that aspect of the film at all. But that's really, truly what it's about. Whether that's why thinking about how this goes into a sequel is really, I would assume, Joanna or taking her story back, right? And that's,
Right.
She's got this idea of Julie going through this and everything that happens in her life while she's dealing with this massive addiction, not her addiction, but her partner with the addiction. I think it's really interesting to think that someone who may have lived this would be interested in making a sequel that doesn't include that at all. This movie is going to be about addiction. That movie is going to be about something different.
Yes. I'm assuming this is, this part of her life, and then where does she go after that? How does she live her life after this relationship? And it's interesting because I was surprised, as you mentioned, there's none of the descriptions really get into sort of the key factor of the addiction.
Yeah, I hope it's not a spoiler. I mean, we bring it up, but I don't think it is, because I think it's so core to what this film is about. So I feel like it's okay to talk about, but nothing that you read will prepare you for it. So it almost feels a little bit like a spoiler for us to talk about it in this way.
But I couldn't say, if somebody had told me that, I would be watching and go, oh, geez, they just ruined this whole movie. Though, there's addiction in there.
The heroin, of course.
Yes, exactly. But yeah,
I see high people. Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
Right. Yes. But knowing that this is really a personal story, semi-autobiographical, and in some of the articles I read, even Julie's projects, I guess, are inspired by or very similar to Joanna's projects when she was a film student. So even the apartment, the main set, is a reconstruction of her apartment to look just like it.
Wow.
And the views out the windows are actually, they filmed in a hangar, and they blew up 35 millimeter prints of photographs she'd taken from her apartment as a student and projected those outside. So those are not actual views of what's really out there. That's the view from her apartment as a student in the 80s. So really, focused on recreating everything. Yeah. And that gets to my question of, is this a film that struggles as like The Road's Not Taken? Is this too personal of a narrative that it creates barriers between the filmmaker and the audience, that we can't access what's really, is this somebody working through this, and we're observing it, but won't get all of the pieces? Because there's a lot of things going on that I could not really connect in terms of visual style. There's some things that happen throughout that I thought, I don't know what that means or what I'm supposed to make of that. I don't have any context clues to understand why the first time, Julie picks up the little, first note Anthony has left for her, there's like the film, like it's like gets blown out, lens flare, or, something like that. There's other sequences that are shot like in video that's like really, blown up, and, the image is breaking down. I don't know what to make of that, because there's nothing to tell me how to respond to that. I'm not given any clues. It looks good, but for me, it just created more of a, here's something in between me and the story that I can't access.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely felt like that throughout. I felt like it was some sort of like a poem that that I really just couldn't understand the metaphors. Um, and a lot of the stuff that's done for art's sake, I wasn't able to connect to it. So I think I felt throughout like I wasn't smart enough for this movie. And that was hard for me to watch. So I think it will be difficult. But that being said, there are some amazing ideas throughout. You have to sit through a lot of interpretive art to suss that out, but there are some really interesting ideas there, and that's why I focus on the addiction part, because I think if that is something that's interesting to you, or that is something that hits home, that is something that maybe you want to watch in a sort of tragic, dramatic sort of way, this is going to be a very artful way to watch that, and that's who I would recommend this for. If you want a portrait of addiction, I think this is one that's a very artful way to look at that for sure.
Yes, and I think the other thing that is worth mentioning is, though it's a linear story, there are chunks. We don't get a strong sense of time, of how much time has passed. There's not a lot of exposition to explain things of, and I think it's smart writing. We don't have characters having those conversations that we see often in movies, of two characters talking about something that there's no reason for them to talk about this other than the audience needs the information. We don't have that. So all that, front loading of information is not there. So what is going on at this point? I don't know. This scene just ended. This one started. Is this the next day? Could this be a week later? It doesn't tell us that, because, as I said, it's giving us just the key moments. And that's so you can see the progression of the relationship. I
don't want to say just the key moments, because it gives you a lot of moments that are questionable whether they're key or not. But yes, I think the point that you're trying to make is that it doesn't spoon feed you the narrative, and it allows you to do some work as an audience member to figure out where you're going and where you are in space and time, I think is a key aspect of that too.
So those are, I guess, are sort of my warnings to people that, this may not be for you if you're expecting like, oh, it's this nice little love story and I'm going to follow from point, the typical ups and downs of the relationship and things resolve all that. No, you're not going to get that. Right. You're going to get addiction. You're going to get chopped up narrative that's not going to, tell you where you are or what just happened prior to that.
And it's modern art. It's interpretive in a lot of its ways. It's modern art, and that has to be something that you're comfortable with to attempt this film.
Yes, exactly. So so I'd say that's the big dividing point on this one is, if you've heard great things about it and it's this love story, yes, but no. So that's, again, I would say, yes, I think you're right on. If I was in the video store, it would not be in the rom-com section. It wouldn't be in the drama section. It would be indie art house, way over here, art film.
Not even in drama.
Over there.
Something that's a weird end cap that is, our emo staff member recommends, right? Like that's where you'd find this film.
And I guess a clue to that should be that Tilda Swinton stars in this movie. So that can sometimes be an indicator. Not necessarily, although she was in a Marvel movie, we do have that. But typically, this is art house Tilda doing her best there as the mother.
Yes.
Where did that end up then with your rankings and your ratings for this one?
As much as I admire a lot of the risks that are taken here and what's being put on screen, I think it's so choppy and there was so much space. And that's usually not a negative, but for me it was really hard to watch. I got bored in a lot of places. The reveals, the parts where I finally understood where the story was going, and I don't even want to call it that the story was going there. I finally understood the emotion that I was supposed to be feeling in following the story. Those things were all effective, but ultimately I was very bored with the movie. It felt very pedestrian. It felt very slow, very static. And I think that was on purpose. I think it was meant to be flat modern art like we described. So I only gave it 2 stars. I gave it 2 as opposed to, trashing it all the way, because I respect a lot of what was in there. There was some really neat camera work. All of the artistic stuff was there. It's just really not a movie for me. And so it was 2 stars and a no like. On Flickchart, it showed up at 228 out of 262. And interestingly enough, because of how I felt about this movie, it felt really... I want to say easy to rank. It felt really like straightforward. When it came up against a movie, I could say, I disliked that movie and it wasn't special, so it was easy to go below that, or this movie wasn't special but I kind of saw things. So it at 228 is just below The Dark Tower, which I think is not a good movie, but I respect the story, and above Breaking News in Yuba County, which we did for film board recently, and I just thought that was a really, really terrible movie. So so it's right there, 228 out of 262 for me, and 2 stars. How about you?
Well, for me, it ended up a little bit higher.
Okay.
And it's something that I agree. There were moments watching it where I thought, okay, where is this going? How long is this going to last? What's going on? But once it really found its footing, I think, midway through, as we really get into the addiction storyline, because a lot of it is just setting up some pieces. Once things get there, things seem to really ramp up. And for me, the ending worked really, really well. There was something very powerful in the ending of this film that sort of I want to say recontextualized everything, but it gave me a sense of, this is why this story was told, or this is what this means for Julie, because we see her there, shooting her film, and just the way everything worked together. It resolved things nicely for me. It wasn't just, and the story ends there. It tied up some of the pieces, and I can get more into that later on. So for me, that put it up at 3.5 stars and a like. And because of the artfulness of that will always, that will always get me in, if it's striving for something different, I can respect that. It ended up just slightly above my halfway point on Flickchart at 327 out of 759. So it's in a mix of other films that I mildly enjoyed and appreciate the artfulness of them, but I don't really love them, and I'm not likely to watch them or say, yeah, this is just, I'm not strongly recommending. If I get a sense of, this is your time to think, I might say, have you seen this? But it's not going to be a blind recommendation to anybody of like, hey, you really need to check this out, because it's not for everybody. And that just sort of put that, in that middle zone of a whole mess of strange things that just flutter around in there. It is right below Picnic at Hanging Rock, Peter Weir's film from 1975 about some girls at a girls' school that go out on a picnic and all kinds of weird things happen. I'm trying to get some content. Okay, so it's just below Zombieland Double Tap. There's a couple places above that.
Couldn't be more different from that movie, but yes, I understand what you're saying.
Exactly. So it's, it's right around there. It's in a really weird spot. And this is one that, as I looked into how it had been ranked and rated on Letterboxd and IMDb, I think it shows a clear split in the audiences for those two platforms.
Okay.
So, for example, over on Letterboxd, it's got an overall weighted average of 3.4 based on about 26,000 reviews.
That seems like high for this movie. That seems like more reviews than I would have guessed.
Right. Well, over at IMDb, it has a rating of 6.4 based on 9,300 votes.
Okay, so there you go. There's your difference in audiences there.
So it's, whether it's IMDb appeals to the more mainstream, if Letterboxd is more international and art focused, I don't know. But typically that seemed like a really strong difference between that, because if anything, usually IMDb is going to have more ratings on it. But they still put it right, 3.4, 6.4, right around the same place of that sort of slightly, higher than middle ground.
I'm validating your judgments about both those platforms. I think you are accurate in both those points. And I think this is the first time I've noticed that it bears it out in a really sort of strong way about the different people that are frequenting both sites.
So listeners, if you think that this is your kind of film and don't want anything spoiled, this is your chance to pause the podcast and go check out The Souvenir on Amazon Prime, Canopy, or Hoopla. All right.
Okay.
JJ.
Yes.
Let's dig into The Souvenir. Do we even want to start with, why is it called The Souvenir?
Well, and okay, you said you liked the music. I felt
the 80s music, the early 80s.
But it didn't seem to connect with all. So this is why I do it after the title. They didn't seem to connect at all with what was happening in the story. And at sometimes they even felt jarring, depending on the sort of drama that was happening with what was there. And again, maybe it's the autobiographical context, whatever. But so The Souvenir, the song, it sounded like a little bit of sort of French jazz-ish kind of thing. I don't know. Yeah. But it's played twice. And I mean, it really, I feel like that the music cue was the only thing that really keyed me into the aspect of what the title was.
Well, it's the title of the artwork that they go see at the museum of the woman carving the name in the tree.
So that
or the
too.
initials in the tree.
So then
there's that.
Yet another touchstone that has nothing to do with what's in the film.
Right, because they go visit that, and she looks kind of sad. Oh, I think she looks determined, and it's like, oh, she's definitely in love. Is this? Are they talking about their relationship? I don't know.
Yes.
Is this what connection does Julie have? Again, it's not clear at all. Is this is she reflecting on loss? I don't know.
There's so much metaphor and meta in this film that it gets really interpretive to whatever you feel is the right thing. I mean, you could go into Julie's story for the film that she's pitching to shoot, and this sort of concept of a town that is in ruins, and then apply that story to the relationship or to her partner, to Anthony, to all these things. There's so many different interpretations you could pull from all of the different, whether it's metaphor or whether it's meant to be cues for the way we think about what's happening in Julie's life. There's so many times that you as a viewer could latch onto something like that. And the Souvenir, I guess, is kind of that thing too. But again, the literal definition of souvenir, do you have an interpretation for that? I don't.
No,
okay.
I don't.
Good.
And that's,
then I
wasn't thinking about that. No, again, you're right. There are so many pieces that I guess because it's vague and it's left to interpretation, because by the time I got to the end of the movie, I was reflecting on, at the beginning of the film, Julie's got her project of this, the main character and the mother and the dying town. And then at the end of the film, he loses his mother, and it's, all of these things. So I thought, is that fabricated so that we see, Julie's interest in something that is so different from her own life? She comes from money, and she's, writing about this, town that's, that's dying, all of that. And so she's interested in something that's so different from herself. But by the time we get to the end of the film, she's seeing that darkness, that rot, that, that's become part of her life now. So is there no longer the need for her to tell that story? Because there is a little bit of there's a small scene with her and one of the professors at the film school talking about, things that have changed. But again, I can't say, yes, I'm certain 100%, because this is how I can connect those dots.
Well, and isn't that the scene where he tells her that she needs to describe or place in the film the changes that have occurred to her in her life?
Yes.
That's how to make really good art. And then that becomes the meta statement of that's what Joanna is doing in making this film in the first place, which is, I mean, I get it, but it just feels like so on the nose to me that I'm like, I don't need that scene.
Yes.
So
no, I agree. There's that.
It feels a little bit like Girlhood, right? And making the point about from Boyhood is that like we're looking at everything that she was told as she's conceptualizing this film.
True. Yeah. That's the other piece to this is looking at, if I step aside and say, if I just look at this as the story of Julie and Anthony, and I just say, I separate and say, let me put all artfulness aside and say, let me just look at this story. I really struggle with this because there are so many points where I'm thinking, what is the draw? What is the appeal? Because there's not the meet cute that you get in a rom-com or anything like that. It's like, where do you fall in love with the relationship? So that when it gets to the dark side, you can see, why is she still fighting for this relationship? Because he just shows up at a party, he's, renting a room from one of her friends or something. So they just sort of, have a conversation. And by the time it gets to the point where they're in bed together and she sees the marks on his arm and she's like, oh, did you hurt yourself? He's like, oh, I don't know what happened. She's like, that looks like it really hurts. I'm thinking, do you not know what needle marks are? Okay, maybe you don't, but you should, and you need to get out of there. And if that's not enough, then we get the scene that follows right after that is the dinner scene where it's set up as, this is one of Anthony's friends that's graduated from film school. He can provide some connections and advice to Julie. I thought, this will be interesting to see what Julie learns. Anthony leaves and then immediately is like, so habitual heroin user and you, how does this work? And she is like
floored,
clueless. Yeah. And I thought, that's it, done. That should be the big red flag of like, cut it with Anthony, right? If one of his friends is like habitual heroin user, knows and says that I don't see how you two belong together. I don't see this connection at all. Should be a big sign. And so I really struggled with this relationship.
Well, I want to read to you the synopsis.
Why does she do this?
I want to read you the synopsis from Just Watch, which is where I went to find it, because I completely agree with you. Let me just start by saying that, because it says, a shy but ambitious film student falls into an intense, emotionally fraught relationship with a charismatic but untrustworthy older man. First of all, he has no charisma at all. I mean, he is not. What?
He's mysterious.
Enigmatic? That would be great. Describe him as that. But charismatic? Yeah. What? There's no how. What? I mean, no. Maybe that's English charisma, and that's why we don't get it. But I mean, I didn't see them fall in love either. But they were deeply in love, evidently. I mean, she seemed like she was addicted to him to some degree too, and that she took him back with so many very highly negative stories, negative crises that happened between them.
Yes.
So,
well, the lies, so many lies, because at first it's he's set up as this, sort of mysterious. I've got this job with the Foreign Office. So he's in international affairs of some sort. So there's things that he can't talk about. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. Older man with a mysterious history and a job that he can't talk about. Right. Okay, I could see maybe the appeal of that. But then it becomes so clear when she's driving him to like his heroin pickups and he's like, no, this is for the work. And I'm like, no, it is not. There's no part of, I need to go buy drugs, or I have to be at this where these drug deals happen. That's part of my job. Or when he robs her apartment and says, if I didn't do this, I wouldn't be here right now. This is, I can't explain why. And I'm thinking, because you either owed somebody a lot of money,
or needed more drugs.
They were going to kill you, or you needed more drugs. Yeah. And I thought, after that Venice trip, and he reveals that he's the one that, ransacked the apartment and took everything and sold it for money. I like, why are you still with this guy? That's the part I really, really struggled with. And so then I thought, okay, by the time I get further into it, is this metaphor? Is this, again, going back to her initial story of, this is really a story of a woman that's now confronting the other side of life that she is intrigued by because it's so different from her own life. And is that the draw? But it's not clear.
I like that idea. Right? I mean, I almost think that, what's not on screen is them falling in love, and we've established that. So maybe the point that Joanna's trying to make here is that there was no reason for her to care so much about this person. There was something about their bond, or something about her as a character, since we're going to see a sequel. There's something about Julie, the Julie character, that needed that experience. And so she was bound to it in a way that was so super unhealthy. So I mean, but we never see them fall in love, and their love is completely confusing to anyone who's watching the film, for sure.
Well, there's just confusing sequences as well, because there's the sequence where she wakes up in the morning and there's like the little trail of notes going up the stairs, and she follows them. I'm like, okay, where's this taking her? She goes up the stairs into the upper, floor up there and across to the window. And as soon as she gets to the window, there's like an huge explosion down the street. And I thought,
what?
Did he know this was going to happen? And I'm like, is this his dark, political side of, he knew that there was going to be a bomb going off from the IRA or something?
That's generous,
there?
Steve.
Like,
that's generous.
No, I know.
Okay.
I know. Cause I'm like trying to make sense of it. I'm struggling. Like, why? I don't know what the purpose of the notes were. I thought, it's a cute thing. It's going to be like he's made her breakfast or something. He's trying to redeem no, it's just to the window. And then there's this explosion. And I thought, okay. And then we cut to, she's at the, they're at the place where he's getting his drugs. And we hear the story on the news of like, there was a bomb that went off. And so we get the information secondhand through the news that she's listening to, but she's there, taking him to score. And we get no explanation, no understanding, no reference to what that sequence did to her, for her, because her behavior hasn't changed. So I don't even know why that was there. And it gets me back to, as we've discussed in other, films of, well, it's there because it's a personal film and it's something that happened. Right. And I'm like, I can't reconcile that. It's not even one of those, like, I could say visually beautiful moments where I could say, she's recapturing something. and it may not make sense, but at least I've got a visual treat to endure here.
Well, that's why
I don't even have that.
That's why I mentioned in the intro, I said that there's non sequitur cutaways, because there are multiple times where we're shown things that to the viewer, there is literally no through line or sort of connecting thread to what's happening. There's a reason that they choose to show it to us, but it's completely, there's no way for us to understand what that is. And that the example that you just gave, the notes to the bomb, it could be any number of things. So if you want to interpret it as his job, or if you want to interpret it as his something from his addiction, or something artful that we can't even jump to, it's fine. But there's many of those, and some of them are shorter and even more random than what we get from that, because at least that seems like something that's some sort of cute aspect of their relationship or something, right? The stuffed animals all around the house. I don't know. Again, it's generous of us to even go that way.
Yeah.
But the film is loaded with those types of moments that seem generally out of place because we didn't live the life that Joanna led.
Yes, and there are other scenes that maybe go a little long, but I feel it's that sort of like realism of, I'm going to capture the scene of just everyday life. Because there's the one that struck me at first was they're in the apartment, and I did appreciate the way it was framed, because she's sort of like in the main room and he's over in the kitchen, and the doorway sort of splits the frame, and opera is on and he's cooking dinner. And then she's like rummaging around her cassette tapes to find something, then eventually gets to, finds what she wants, puts on it's some early 80s, pop, punk, rock or whatever. So it's a sharp contrast from who she is and her world and what she wants to listen to versus Anthony and his, because he's always got the opera going on.
Always classical in some way or
always the classical. And that was one thing that for me sort of set that up of, they're from two different worlds. And I thought, okay, what am I supposed to be getting out of this? Because he's just cooking dinner, she's rummaging around. I'm like, what am I? And so I thought, okay, there's at least something that I can get. But there are other moments where it's just them,
5 seconds of getting ready for the day.
Yes, exactly.
5 seconds of
things like that.
Post-dinner malaise.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very confusing and this is the space that we were talking about. You could say that it's very realistic too, that maybe this is very lived in, that this is the way that it was experienced, but it feels like a chore. It felt like a chore for me to watch. All of that for sure.
So what redeemed it for me, then if we have all of this mess, and I'm trying to think if there's anything throughout that I think we can talk about Tilda Swinton's performance as her mother. I think that's, was amazing, of the parent who will do everything for her daughter, will ask questions, but not really confront her.
Right.
We do see there's several calls because Anthony has no money, or he's always just leaning on Julie for money. So she's paying for dinner. So we get the, recurring, Mom,
writes,
can I borrow some more money? I'll pay you back.
He bought the first dinner. He bought the first dinner, and then everything else in the film is paid for by Julie.
Right. But we see that all those conversations of, Mom, it's just, I'll pay you back. I need some more money. It's for camera and film and, the cost of doing this. And so it's that, okay. And we never get the questions of, because Anthony comes to dinner with the family and things seem to go fairly smoothly. You've got a little bit of the political tension of different generations of, how should we handle this situation? But that seemed normal. That's what I would expect. And so I was really intrigued with, since we're getting into an addiction story, at what point do the parents figure things out? And we don't get that scene, because we do eventually see that, Anthony is, he's had some ups and downs. He's had some rough spouts. So Julie's mom moves in with her. And that's where we get, the scene near the end where Barbara, Anthony's mom, calls, and we get that scene where, Mom answers the phone, comes down the stairs. And to me, it was a great line. She just says the worst.
Right. That's all she says.
That's all she says. And I know, but it's clear she's, there have been conversations, there's been things going on that, okay, everybody understands that Anthony has this addiction problem, because he went to rehab. He tried to clean himself up. He went through all of that. But we don't have those tense moments. We don't have the confrontation of the parent saying to the daughter, what are you doing with this guy? He's not worth it. And he's an addict and all that. We don't have all of that heightened drama, which for me makes it a challenge, because I think that flattens, as you said, it does. It's a very flat film. And I think that flattens the tone of the film out. But I think, to see those moments, when you get those other characters, somebody like Tilda Swinton to deliver, the explanation of, the matter of fact.
Well, she was amazing in this film. I mean, that explanation, and then the moment thereafter where she's looking directly into the camera and gives this sort of the journalistic report of what happened and how he was found, and the emotions that her character goes through as she does it. I was just shocked. I mean, she stole the movie in those moments, even though there was so much else going on. I'm just like, oh yes, here comes, this is a masterclass on how to deliver this emotion. But she was wonderful. I loved everything she did in it. She was perfect.
So I guess we should talk about the connection a little bit. I hadn't intended to get there, but so we've got a couple things going on here. So Julie, Honor Swinton Byrne, is Tilda Swinton's daughter.
Right.
So we've got that. So cast mom and daughter as mom and daughter. Do that. But actually, Tilda Swinton and Joanna Hogg went to school together and have known each other since college. So
wow,
they, when Joanna Hogg was first in film school shooting things, that Tilda Swinton, they were friends, so they have a long history. Going back. So there is,
there's real emotion there, especially if this is autobiographical.
Exactly what I was thinking of. Somebody that, if this is a very personal story, somebody that's been a part of her life for so long is going to understand these moments in this film, be able to deliver with, an actor of Tilda Swinton's caliber is able to deliver that, knowing what this means, what this scene means, the weight that this carries, the emotions, brings that to this. And I think that worked, very well. And I have to say, as Julie Honor Swinton Byrne, this is her first performance in a film. She was actually picked because Joanna was visiting Tilda, talking about casting, and just on a whim was like, well, wait a second, let's try her. And the structure that they used was that, from what I read, was they gave Honor Swinton Byrne all of Joanna Hogg's like diaries, journals from that era in the 80s.
Awesome.
And not a script, but everybody else had script. So it was basically somewhat improvised in terms of other actors in a scene would know where things need to go.
Right.
And had lines and had direction to get there. And Honor, as Julie, is having to embody this character and react to what's going on based on sort of the DNA she's been given of this character that she's playing.
I think, as an artistic choice from the writer-director, I think that's really interesting because it's, especially if it's autobiographical, she must have felt that way. She must have felt like everything around her was leading her, and she didn't know.
Right.
She didn't know how to direct her life at the time, and that's why she's left or she's created this environment for the actress to do too. I think that's really interesting. Really interesting filmmaking.
Exactly. Because if I hadn't read that, I would have never known.
Right.
There's nothing that feels contrived or awkward or, for somebody that's a first time, like being able to carry scenes with the emotional weight that's going on. I mean, this is, a lot to ask of a, first time, actor. So I have to credit that. I think the performances, everything worked really well. I think it comes back to story of what we're given, the scenes that we're given, all of those pieces, which leads me to sort of the end and the final moments where things come together, because I went back and sort of skimmed through sort of as a refresh. I watched this, over the weekend, and now, here, a few days later, I just wanted a refresh of because like you, there are moments where you can sort of glaze over, like what, so I wanted to refresh what happened in what order, so I could place things as we talked about it. And we get those segments that stood out to me. And these may be some of these non sequitur moments you're talking about, where we get shot of a landscape and like Julie reading a letter from Anthony.
That's what that was a letter? It felt like a poem to me. I had a tough time figuring out context of it, but that makes sense.
Right, because it's not introduced at all. But as I skimmed through, I was like, okay, I remember these. But then I started looking at the landscape because I'm like, okay, this is similar. And then when we get to the end of the film, so the very final shot is they're out in, filming her student film or whatever. And at the end, they're in a big like hangar, and the door rolls open, and Julie walks out to the edge of the door and looks out. That's the scenery.
Yeah.
Right there that she's looking at, that we've seen in those moments where she's. So I'm trying to piece together, are these moments that we get throughout her thoughts, her reflections
from the end, Julie?
From the end, Julie,
Yeah.
that it's sort of like memories pre-inserted, all that, because I was surprised the film ended there, because I thought for 2 seconds, I thought it was going to end, 30 seconds earlier, because we've got that shot where they're shooting their scene and the camera slowly pushes in, and it's the actress of the film reading a poem. I looked it up because it sounded really familiar to me. It's When I Am Dead, My Dearest by Christina Rossetti. And so as she's reading that and finishes that, the crew has moved forward enough so that we're just left with Julie on the side of the frame, and then she looks to the camera.
So, and
with this,
I didn't feel like she looked directly into the camera. I felt like she was looking just off and to the right, but it was tough. Like, I was like, is she looking at me? I couldn't tell.
So for me, it was
at you.
I'm looking at you, and the expression on her face, I'm not sure how to interpret it. It's the almost like a challenge of, are you judging me?
Sure.
For what I did, you know,
right.
it's, and I thought for sure, I saw that and I was like, wow, the movie's going to end. And then it didn't. And then she walks out to look at that. And I thought, okay, that's an interesting way to end it. And then I, thinking, oh, well, there's a sequel. Is it going to pick up here? Is is that her moving into the next phase of her life?
As the door
she's
opens,
finished her film.
Yeah.
The door has opened. She's moving out into the next phase of her life.
I love that idea.
I won't know until I see the next one. But it was the culmination of those moments earlier, seeing her finish her film, just the powerful way that was shot. It worked so well for me, of this really great poem that's about loss and death and mourning, and Julie, confronting the audience with that look. To me, that tied everything up. And I thought, okay, this was, in the last few minutes, we get powerful culmination of what she has gone through. And for me, that's where I felt it earned that in a way that I'm willing to probably forgive a lot of the other things beforehand, because it was processed to get me to that result. And that's why I end up at a 3.5, because I honestly, halfway through, I was like, yeah, this is 2 stars. I don't know where this is going.
That's where I was.
I'd heard so many great things. I'm like, I don't get it. I don't understand this relationship. I'm not rooting for anybody in this relationship. She's making horrible choices. Yeah. We're not getting the full story. What's going on? And then by the time we got to the end, I thought, okay, this works somehow. I can't put my finger on it, but thematically, metaphorically, or whatever, I feel like she's gone on a journey. She has transformed herself into something by going through this process.
Like I said, I respect it more than Breaking News in Yuba County, but it never brought me back to where it did for you.
Yeah, that's where I ended with this one, and it's not everybody's going to take that journey,
right?
With us and all of that, and I think that's probably really all there is to say about. About the Souvenir. I mean, it's for some people, there's not a lot. And I mean, if anyone's listening to this podcast and you have a different reaction to this movie, you're able to key into some of this information, because I feel like, there's something more to be said. JJ, I think you hinted at that too, of like, it feels like there's something we're not able to access.
Yeah, I think, and
right?
we talked about in the intro that maybe it's for someone who has been touched by addiction or that kind of stuff. But I think even better, if people are into this sort of art house, if they're into the Sundance to Cannes run, right? This idea, those sort of films where they want to see the high art of the things, I think you'll appreciate this film, and the drama will hit you in a way that somewhat where I need a little bit more hand-holding than this film was willing to give. So if you are looking for film in high art, this would be a nice one to try. And then for you to come back and tell us why we're idiots about it, because it made me feel dumb. It made me feel like the movie was too smart for me. And that's definitely possible in the realm of these films. So the fact that you heard a lot of great things about it, Steve, I think is more evidence about that as well. There are a number of people in our audience, in our community, that might enjoy taking a look at this as high art compared to a lot of the things that we cover here on Trailer Rewind or on any of our other shows as well.
Right. And this is one that if it was more my genre, I might be willing to put in that work of a couple more viewings to see how things may connect. Because I feel like this is something that perhaps on rewatch, seeing the context of a scene, knowing some things, is that what it takes, to see these things? Or is there something in, Anthony's letters that she's reading? How can how much work do you need to put into this? And it's not one that I'm willing to put that work in, because I just did not find that the content that engaging. But if there's someone that is that interested and does that work, I'd love to hear from you, because I feel like there is artfulness to this. This is not an amateur filmmaker. This is very intentional. The question just is it accessible?
Yeah.
And so
are you willing to put in that work as a viewer?
Right.
Yep.
Exactly. Well, that's, what we have to say about the Souvenir for coming up next. JJ, we're moving to something that hopefully will be more accessible, but I don't know that it's going to be any more uplifting.
That's okay.
For us
That's okay.
on this one. Coming up next, we are going to be talking about the Book of Henry, which is available to stream on Netflix, and we are going to be joined by our frequent guest, Tommy Handsome,
Yay!
for that one. So
Tommy's
it'll be
back.
good to have Tommy on board to talk about the Book of Henry. Thank you for listening to Trailer Rewind. If anything we said here entertained, educated, or even enraged you, we'd like you to tell people about this podcast. Whatever your listening platform is, please share, rate, or write a short review. It helps other podcast listeners find us. If you enjoy connecting with other film fans, you can become a member of our community on Discord. It's free, and there's always an interesting dialogue or debate to jump into. You can also financially support us. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive Discord channels, the opportunity to chat with us live before we record an episode, and the warm feeling you get knowing you are contributing support to the behind-the-scenes resources that help everyone here at the Next Reel family of podcasts. So please join us on Discord or become a Patreon supporter. Either way, we would love to have you be part of our community. Hondo.